Good afternoon to you, Mark Sudduth, HurricaneTrack.com here with you, and it's time for the Hurricane Pro and HD video blog for the 14th day of July 2014. Let us start with the anomalies, the departures from normal. You can easily see the Eastern Pacific here warmer than it should be, whereas the Central Pacific are getting close to that area, what we also call the Nino 3.4 area. The tropical Pacific divided up into different regions to define the El Nino regions, and this area here is typically where we expect to see the warmer water spread to, and it's not doing it. You can see that there's cold anomalies now showing up in what we refer to as the Nino 3.4 region, but Nino areas 1 and 2 very, very warm compared to the long-term average, as is a good deal of the Eastern Pacific here north of the Nino region. What does that all mean? It means that, first of all, we are not close to an El Nino being declared yet, because these cold anomalies are taking the punch out, literally, and so we're not seeing an El Nino classic pattern setting up just yet. This warm water in the East Pac, though, close to land, could be a problem as we approach the peak of the hurricane season in the Pacific, where you start getting the hurricanes recurving into mainland Mexico. On the Atlantic side, the deep tropics here into the Caribbean still struggling a bit. I guess averaged out, this is probably right at normal to slightly below in some areas. But then in the subtropics up here, removed from the deep tropical Atlantic, this water profile is much warmer than the long-term average. So it kind of messes up the pattern a little bit. You want the warm water, if you're looking for hurricane development, to be down in the tropics where the tropical waves are, to take advantage of that. When the warmer water compared to normal is way up in the subtropics, away from the typical breeding grounds, then you have a different type of pattern set up, and one that can favor, doesn't mean that it will, but it can favor landfalling hurricanes that are intensifying as they come in. And you think about all this warm water, if something comes out of the deep tropics not doing too well because of the cooler water and hostile conditions down here, but then up here it reaches this warmer water, and I'm just hypothetical here, it's aiming for the Northeast and the Carolinas, it's got to cross this warm water anomaly to get there. So just something to keep in mind is going to start to be important as we get to the heart of the hurricane season in a little over a month. Anything developing out there right now? No, not really. Intertropical convergent zone snaking its way through the Pacific. In the western Pacific, off the edge of the satellite photo, well off the edge, there is a typhoon headed for Japan. Nope, scratch that. The Philippines, what I was trying to say, I was thinking about the typhoon the other last week that impacted Japan, but there is a typhoon looming off the coast of the Philippines in an area where they really just honestly could go without for a couple of years. But unfortunately, the Philippines are impacted by tropical cyclones on a multiple hit basis every single year. They're right there in the typhoon highway, literally in the western Pacific. Moving on east in the Atlantic basin, a little bit more active intertropical convergent zone, but still nothing that looks like it'll develop. Maybe a weak monsoon trough setting up in the eastern Pacific, stretching to some extent across Central America. But we're not in an upward motion favorable phase right now of the Madden-Julian oscillation, and that basically just says that conditions are more sinking air and subsidence, cyclonic flow aloft instead of upward motion, which encourages tropical thunderstorm development, and divergent flow aloft. It's the opposite of what we're looking for development, and so that's good news for coastal dwellers anywhere. In the far eastern Atlantic, the Saharan air layer still pretty prevalent here in the East Atlantic, but starting to loosen its grip just a little bit out here in the rest of the deep tropics. So still has a ways to go, another month to a month and a half before we really start to aim our eyes out here in looking for something to develop this far east. But the Saharan air layer just starting to loosen its grip ever so slightly each day, as is expected as we move through July and into August. The Madden-Julian oscillation, I mentioned that, the upward motion pulse right now, that favors the maritime continent region around to the western Pacific, almost anyway, phases 5 and then almost into 6. This is the GFS, by the way. And then it shows the forecast here going into the circle, which is a very de-amplified MJO. Basically, it's just non-existent. You don't have much MJO-related activity anywhere around the globe. But then the ensemble mean here, the GFS, or maybe this is the operational, I need to go back and look. But I think that this is the average, the green line, really points it out into phases 1 and 2, which is the Western Hemisphere and Africa. And you can see that the spread of the ensemble members here in the gray indicates, pretty good confidence that right down the middle it looks like everything's aimed for phases 1 and 2, which would favor Atlantic development in about 2 weeks. On the other hand, the Euro, the ECMWF, and its ensemble members, if you kind of draw it out here in red, generally aim it maybe towards phase 2 into phase 3. So not so much into 1 and 2. Just interesting stuff here, the battle between the two models. But the general idea is definitely into the circle, and then maybe towards the Indian Ocean, maybe towards the Atlantic Basin. We'll just have to wait and see in a couple of weeks what really happens. But the good news is, the week ahead, no tropical development seen in the Atlantic or the Eastern Pacific. The global computer model is remaining calm and not developing anything over the next several days. So that is it from me for today. I'm Mark Sudduth for HurricaneTrack.com. That's my website. And of course, Hurricane Pro in HD. Always a privilege and an honor to be able to hopefully educate you about what's happening in the tropics on a different level than just showing you some satellite pictures and saying, yeah, that's it, nothing's going to happen. I like to get into a little bit more detail and explain things a little better. So hopefully you can understand them. And when something does pop up, it's not so mysterious. All right? Have a good rest of your Monday and a week ahead. I'll be back with you next Monday.